Well, hello, dear friends. Hello, dear students. Hello, dear guests. Today, we are very glad to see you. And we are having the second part of our King Lear cycle. And I'm absolutely happy to introduce my colleague, Professor Michael Dobson, the director of Shakespeare Institute of the University of Birmingham in Stretford-upon-Avon, and a great, or probably even one of the greatest friends of Ukrainian Shakespeare Center, who supports our country, especially during this war since 2014. He delivered some lectures for Ukrainian scholars and students, and even after the full-scale aggression started, he delivered lectures for Ukrainian Shakespeareans and students who were in the points of I've forgotten how to say it, пункти незламності, invincibility, yeah, if I'm not mistaken. And it was a lecture that was dedicated to Pericles. Together, it was a binary lecture together with Kelly Hunter, the director of Flute Theatre from London. Then he organized a set of events to support our country in Stretford-upon-Avon and in Shakespeare Society, and Shakespeare community. He gave the donation for our volunteering group that is called Shakespeare, and we were able to buy a drone that is signed Shakespeare, so we can see this drone over our heads in Ukrainian skies even today. Thanks to Michael Dobson. So our applause to him. Thank you very much. We are very thankful for this donation. By the way, it was his award, which was given from Craiova Festival, if I'm not mistaken. So the whole was given for our victory. Michael Dobson is a very brave person. He visited the first Ukrainian Shakespeare Festival in Ivano-Frankivsk, which was last year in 2024. He was there in person. He delivered lecture for the participants and the guests of the festival there. And today we have the lecture that is dedicated to King Lear, a broken play for a broken world. And as far as I see, there are about 60 persons now, but I'm absolutely sure that the number of the participants, the number of the people who will listen to this lecture, it is growing up. And today we have students and scholars and the members of Shakespeare community of Ukraine from Zaporizhia, Kharkiv, Kyiv, Ternopil, Kryvyi Rih, Poltava, Dnipro. Probably I didn't mention someone, and if I'm wrong, you should add the name of your city, the name of your university. And it is the second lecture in the King Lear cycle. Yesterday we had the lecture for the students, and in a day, on Monday, we will be able to listen to our guests, our honorary guests, the members of the staff of the theater on the left bank of the Dnieper River. And I see Oleg Stefan here, our Ukrainian King Lear. We can applause to him, and we will be very happy to communicate with Oleg and with the director. Probably he is with us, but I can't see him now. And we will see we will meet Dmytro Zakhozhenko, who is the director of this play in Ukraine. And this meeting will be at 7:00 p.m. in Ukraine on Monday. And now I'm very happy to introduce you my dearest friend, my colleague, and the person who has been doing so much for our country in order to make the victory of Ukraine closer. So Michael Dobson, Professor Michael Dobson from Stretford-upon-Avon, you're welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Natalia. It's an incredible privilege always to be speaking to a Ukrainian audience. I don't know anywhere in the world where the plays of Shakespeare are more alive than they are in Ukraine. And I'm very, very pleased that Oleg Stefan is going to be playing King Lear. I have to say his Prospero, which I saw in Ivano-Frankivsk last June, was one of the highlights of my theatre-going career. I thought that was a stunning production with an incredible performance at the centre of it. I'm going to talk in four kind of installments. This talk mainly falls into four pieces. There will be, let me see, here we go. If I can just move the slide on, if it hasn't jammed already. Yeah, this is Schofield. There we go. I'll begin with a preface about a particular King Lear, which is still very much remembered in this country. I will then talk about the ending of King Lear, which is Shakespeare's most distinctive contribution to the story he retells in this play, and where it fits into the overall shape of Shakespeare's career and the particular circumstances of Shakespeare's career while he was working on this play. Then I will look at homelessness in the play and the play's tendency towards the emblematic and what this does for our sense of the spiritual landscape to which this play transports us. And then, just as a kind of postscript, I will just indulge myself by talking about some particular avenues in how one interprets this play on stage, which I have seen different actors and directors experiment with. Because, you know, I've now been going to see productions of King Lear for close on 50 years. I've probably seen more productions of King Lear than can really be good for me. And, you know, I have some sense, you know, I've seen it in many different languages, and I have some sense of what some of the options are that different directors and actors have been able to take with this particular very extraordinary script. Because it's Easter, because here we are on Easter Saturday, this seems like perhaps the wrong festival for thinking about King Lear. There is really very little resurrection in King Lear, very little prospect of any resurrection in King Lear. And this picture is Paul Schofield, who was a very famous King Lear for the Royal Shakespeare Company here in Stratford in the early 1960s, purely as an Easter present, and this is completely irrelevant to King Lear. Let me tell you a small story about that production and another production which happened as a result. When Peter Brook was about to start the rehearsals for this production of King Lear, when he had already cast it, when he'd got a brilliant young actress called Diana Rigg to play Cordelia, Paul Schofield fell ill. So the production had to be postponed. And the Royal Shakespeare Company had, at very short notice, to find something else to put on in place of this postponed production of King Lear. So with many of the same actors, they hired in a professional director from London called Clifford Williams, and they only had 3 weeks. And in 3 weeks, they put together a production of The Comedy of Errors, just as a stopgap. In the chat on this Zoom call, I've put a link. Copy that link. Don't do anything with it now. If you click on that link and you've got an internet connection, you will be able to download a monochrome television recording of a live performance of that Comedy of Errors, with most of the cast of King Lear except Paul Schofield, who was ill. It's a lovely show, and it's, of course, much more suitable for Easter because people who were thought dead turn out to be alive, and the family is put back together rather than, as in King Lear, completely exterminated. So there, celebrate Easter with the Comedy of Errors, if you like. It's an interesting old show. Right, onwards. Since it's Easter and this is a family time, and I'm been thinking about Donald Wolfett, a great King Lear. This picture is not Donald Wolfett. This is my own father. I was his youngest child. I have two elder sisters. I was as near as he ever got to Cordelia, which must have been a terrible disappointment to him. As you see there, he is in uniform. He was conscripted into the British Army just after the end of the Second World War. He was too young during the war itself. He was in London throughout the war, during the Blitz, when the city was being bombed every night for 57 nights. His father lost an eye in one of the first ever ballistic missile attacks, when a V-2 rocket hit the train in which he was traveling to work. During his teenage years in London during the war, my father had the great good fortune to see this. Donald Wolfett was a very old-fashioned but incredibly powerful and incredibly dedicated actor who had his own touring company. He was one of the last of the old-fashioned actor managers, and his greatest role was that of King Lear. He was a very, very famous King Lear. And my father saw it during an air raid in Kingston upon Thames in South London, Southwest London, in I think 1943. Years later, I much regret that I didn't go more often to the theatre with my father. I mean, we went when I was a child. We went to see, I remember going to see some very good Stoppard plays with him when they came to my hometown. And we did go to see Peter Brook's production of Antony and Cleopatra together, among other things later on. But once I had a spare ticket for a Royal Shakespeare Company production of King Lear, and I suggested he might come too. And he said no. I saw Donald Wolfett play King Lear during the war. I could never see any other actor play that part. I don't need to see that play ever again. It couldn't possibly be as intense, as powerful, as grand as it was. And it's such a harrowing play. Why would I put myself through it again? Especially somehow during peacetime. It seemed strange to my father that who wanted to make peace and forget the things he had experienced in the army when he was in Germany immediately after the war in the Army of Occupation. Seeing Lear again would have been like going back into the war as far as he was concerned. He didn't want to do it. I remained interested in this production that he talked about. And when I was in I'm a member of the Society for Theatre Research, which arranges meetings of theatre historians to talk about particular topics. And when I was working in London at the University of London, the Society for Theatre Research had a meeting about Donald Wolfett. And it was convened by a man called Ronald Harwood. Ronald Harwood had been Donald Wolfett's dresser. He had helped him with his costume and his makeup. He'd been part of that famous company doing that famous Lear. And indeed, Ronald Harwood wrote a play called The Dresser, which is based on his experiences backstage with Wolfett's company. So I went to this meeting. I was, to my surprise, about the youngest person there. And there was Harwood at the front. And before he started talking about his research and his memories and all the evidence he had about Wolfett's career, he said, "How many people here saw Donald Wolfett act?" And Wolfett died in about 1960, early, mid-60s. Most of the people in the room except me put their hands up. And he then said, "All right, how many of you worked with Donald Wolfett?" And about half the people in the room put their hands up. Generations of actors went through Wolfett's company when they were young. He trained actors as well as employing them. And in fact, one of the actors who worked with Wolfett was the young Harold Pinter. who became such an important playwright in Britain in the 60s and 70s and 80s, a major writer. Pinter played one of the non-speaking knights in King Lear. Years later, here in Stratford, I had a PhD student who was writing a doctoral thesis about the influence of Shakespeare on Harold Pinter. He was a keen amateur actor himself. He was very interested in Pinter's experiences of being in King Lear, being backstage at King Lear, which scenes he was on in King Lear with Wolfit. And me and Greg Doran, who was then the head of the RSC, we were able to arrange for my PhD student to play the same non-speaking knight in a Royal Shakespeare Company production of King Lear with Sir Anthony Sher playing Lear, so that he saw the play in the same way that Pinter had. I don't know if it affected his thesis, but it was a good thesis, and he was a very good non-speaking knight. The way he didn't speak was absolutely perfect. Anyway, Wolfit, the operatic set-piece Lear, he was famous for rising with huge vocalizations to the great major emotive speeches of the play, The Curse on Goneril. Hear me, dear nature, hear me, if ever thou didst intend to make this creature fruitful, and so on. And the howling as he carries on Cordelia in his arms at the end. It was very operatic, very designed to be intense. And famously, he would show how exhausted he was while taking a bow at the end of the play by clinging onto the curtain as though he could barely stand. So, I think my father was right to be impressed by this, especially as a young teenager during an air raid. It's that ending, and again, it's part of the mythology of this play that younger actors, or by now mature actors, go to old actors and ask for advice about how to play King Lear. And the famous piece of advice which older actors are supposed to give, and Ian McKellen told me this story and claimed to have consulted John Gielgud about playing King Lear. And McKellen said Gielgud, of course, said to me, as actors do, "Get a light, Cordelia." That's really the first thing you need if you're going to play King Lear. Here's Pennington in that last scene. And of course, it's the sheer extreme horror and grief of that final bereavement of Lear losing his last child, his youngest child, which is the tableau. That's perhaps the first thing people remember about this play. Partly as a result of this sheer intensity of loss, since the middle of the 20th century, King Lear has often been called Shakespeare's greatest tragedy, but it's also his most apparently broken, as if the familial rupture it dramatizes has shattered not only the state it depicts, but also the conventions of drama itself. Our expectations of resolution and of comforting moral lessons, cued so emphatically by an opening scene straight out of folk tale, are everywhere disappointed in this play. The recognition scene we are led to expect, for instance, between Lear and his disguised faithful counsellor Kent never really happens, since Lear is past recognition by the time the two are reunited after the last battle. And the reunion between the blinded Gloucester, the recognition between Gloucester and his loyal son Edgar, not only happens off stage, but proves fatal to Gloucester, who dies of the emotional shock. With an on-stage blinding among its major incidents, in which one of the blinded man's sons is complicit, King Lear is more than willing to provide emotional shocks to its audiences too. Lear and Cordelia are fortunate enough, late in the play, to enjoy the reconciliation through which we've waited ever since her unjust banishment in the first scene. And it's one of the most moving dialogues in all of Shakespeare, but it's not the conclusion of their story. Indeed, it only sets us up for the most devastating plot twist in the play, delivered towards the very end of its final scene. While most of the other remaining characters in King Lear are reunited on stage, congratulating themselves on having survived the worst, one last atrocity is happening matter-of-factly elsewhere. Out of sight, and at the crucial moment out of mind, the belated political assassination of Lear's youngest child could easily have been prevented. By now, even the man who ordered it, Edmund, doesn't want it to happen, and the aged Lear, we later learn, has only narrowly failed to stop it himself, killing his daughter's hangman just too late. Cordelia's unseen end resembles an accidental bereavement in real life more than it does the poeticized deaths more usually presented in stage tragedy. It's an arbitrary piece of slaughter which mocks drama's usual strategies for finding meaning in violence and death. And to anyone not already familiar with the story of King Lear and his three daughters, it must surely come as the cruelest and most shocking incident in the play. It must have come as an even crueler shock, however, to those many members of Shakespeare's first audiences who already did know the story of King Lear. Of all Lear's chroniclers, remarkably, Shakespeare is the only one who insists on killing Cordelia like this. Even Goneril and Regan survive the conclusive struggle between their army and the French force that backs their father in earlier accounts of the ancient British monarchy. According to Shakespeare's favourite collection of histories, Raphael Holinshed's Chronicles, it was Lear, Cordelia, and the King of France who won the battle, and afterwards a restored Lear reigned for another 2 years before dying peacefully in his bed. Cordelia then ruled in her turn, and her own eventual death, after deposition and imprisonment at the hands of her sister's sons, was suicide rather than a war crime. As Edmund Spenser put it in The Faerie Queene in 1590, years later, Cordelia's sister's children, waxen strong, through proud ambition against her rebelled, and, overcomen, kept in prison long, till, weary of that wretched life, herself she hung. That's the version of the story which Shakespeare knew best, moreover, tactfully stops long before this sad postscript. This anonymous play, the true chronicle history of King Lear and his three daughters, Goneril, Regan, and Cordelia, was written in about 1588. And it concludes once Lear, Cordelia, and their allies have chased away the elder sister's Welsh and Scots armies, so that it can end not in despair, but in reconciliation and restoration. And this is from the very end of the play. Ah, my Cordelia, now I call to mind the modest answer, which I took unkind. But now I see I am no whit beguiled. Thou lovedst me dearly, and as ought a child. The young Shakespeare may well have acted in this play. It was a Queen's Men play, and we think Shakespeare may well have been in the King's Lear when he was a young actor. And it stuck in his mind. He clearly remembered it vividly while composing his early comedy, The Two Gentlemen of Verona, round about 1589. In which, when the Duke of Milan briefly and irrelevantly pretends to have fallen out with his daughter Sylvia, Shakespeare offers what looks like his first draft towards the opening scene of King Lear. And here's this completely irrelevant speech which the Duke of Milan makes to Valentine when he's pretending to have fallen out with Sylvia. No, trust me. She is peevish, sullen, froward, proud, disobedient, stubborn, lacking duty, neither regarding that she is my child, nor fearing me as if I were her father. And may I say to thee, this pride of hers, upon advice, hath drawn my love from her, and where I thought the remnant of mine age should have been cherished by her childlike duty, I turn her out to who will take her in. Then let her beauty be her wedding dower. This is clearly a bit of King Lear, and there it is sticking out in The Two Gentlemen of Verona. You know, this is a story which Shakespeare is already deeply engaged with. Shakespeare, in fact, seems to have spent the first 15 years of his career nerving himself to kill Cordelia. He finally composed his initial version of King Lear in 1605 to 1606, and it appeared in print in 1608. And here is the quarto title page of King Lear. I think it's very striking what the printers chose to emphasize about this play when trying to sell it to potential buyers. It partly distinguishes it from the other King Lear play that we've just seen, because this is the one that gives you the unfortunate life of Edgar, son and heir to the Earl of Gloucester, and his sullen and assumed humour of Tom of Bedlam. You know, those extra scenes about the homeless lunatic are clearly a big thing that they thought was going to sell this play and remind people of what it had been like in performance. As it was played before the King's Majesty at Whitehall upon St. Stephen's Night at the Christmas holidays, well, you know, the King has seen this play, you'd better see this play. You know, that's a selling point. And it's by the best theatre company in the country, by His Majesty's servants, playing usually at the Globe on the Bankside. I'll come back to what it means that it was performed on St. Stephen's Night in a while. Shakespeare's company had been possibly given as a present to King James I when he assumed the throne of England, as well as that of Scotland, in 1603. They had been the Lord Chamberlain's men. They're now the official Royal Theatre Company, the company that the Master of the Revels is going to turn to first when he brings in actors to perform on court occasions. And here we see how, you know, one way in which Shakespeare's life had changed when James finally has his coronation procession in London. We've still got the bills for what it costs to stage it. And here's the list of people who were members of the royal household in one capacity or another, who were given sums of money to buy scarlet cloth to wear red robes in the procession, because red is the royal colour. That's why post boxes, mail boxes in Britain are still red, because it's the royal mail. And here, among the people who are wearing red robes in that coronation procession are William Shakespeare, Augustine Phillips, Lawrence Fletcher, John Hemmings, and Richard Burbage, the leading shareholders and actors in the company. So Shakespeare is now a king's man. He's around the fringes of Whitehall Palace more than he had been under Elizabeth, because James used the actors more. In fact, in the first winter season, this is a priceless couple of pages. They're in the Public Records Office. This is the Rebels' accounts for 1604 to 5. This is the company. We can see what the company staged for when they were called up to court periodically during the whole of that winter. And it's a lot of Shakespeare's back catalogue and special emphasis on Shakespeare's newest work. So the first thing they do on this list is Othello, the Moor of Venice, which Shakespeare had only just written. Then they dug up a comedy they'd already got in their repertory, Merry Wives of Windsor. And then on St. Stephen's Night, which is December the 26th, it's the day after Christmas, which is a highlight of the Christmas season, they did Measure for Measure. That's a very hard-hitting play about the abuse of power. I think it's really interesting that one is scheduled on St. Stephen's Night. And again, I'll have more to say about St. Stephen's Night in a little while. And James took a real informed interest in this. If you look at the last entry in the second column, on Shrove Tuesday, Pancake Day, the beginning of Lent, or rather the last day you can have a play before Lent, a play called The Merchant of Venice, again commanded by the King's Majesty. You know, they'd done Merchant of Venice on Shrove Sunday, and the king said, "Oh, that's really good. Let's have that one again." You know, James was a literary critic. He was a writer. Here's a statue of him giving his works to fame. This is on the Bodleian Library in Oxford, which he gave books to, and which he gave his own works to. He published books about the theory of kingship, and you'll notice that he, in his official portraits, he usually has that slogan, Beati Pacifici, blessed are the peacemakers. He wanted to bring peace to Europe. He also wanted to solve certain things about the government of these particular islands. You can see him in the margin of this map. This is a map by Christopher Saxton, originally drawn up in 1570, in fact, round about the time the house I'm sitting in was built. It was republished in the 17th century with a decorative border showing all the kings of England since 1066, since William the Conqueror, going round clockwise from just off Northumberland and working its way round to the present day via James I, James's son, Charles I, and then there's a blank. Revolution was in the air. You know, a generation later, there's a civil war in England, and the monarchy is temporarily abolished. You know, and the role that the kind of discussion of politics that goes on in Shakespeare's plays plays in this, to what extent that enabled and articulated the possibility of deposing a king is something that's worth talking about, I think. James was already King of Scotland. They rigged the succession so in England so that we get a Protestant king, and he takes over England. And his main agenda was to try and unite the two countries, to try and make this into a single unified state rather than two kingdoms with one monarch. And so James set people to work to design a possible flag. You know, of course, we eventually wound up with the Union flag, which was conveniently displayed on the poster for this very lecture. But here are some of the drafts that the Earl of Nottingham commissioned for James as possible ways in which you could combine the flags of England and Scotland, which either make Scotland look too small or make Scotland look too important, or, you know, Scotland has a population that's smaller than that of Yorkshire. It's tricky how you reconcile Scottish national pride and English on a single flag. But this was much in the air, much talked about. And so the question of how this kingdom of Britain is get divided in King Lear, what it means when that map is divided into three in the first scene. I mean, this is a Shakespeare play with a map as a prop. This would have been very resonant at the time, and of course it still is now. The question of how you divide up that map, who gets to govern which bit, has never really been resolved. Shakespeare stops writing plays just about English history under James and writes about Britannia in Cymbeline and writes about ancient Britain in Cymbeline and in King Lear. This is the frontispiece to John Speed's Book of Maps of James's Kingdom, the Theatre of the Empire of Great Britain. And there is an ancient Britain in pride of place with a very long moustache. You know, that's supposed to be our heroic ancestors, with representatives of all the major immigrant populations, the Romans, the Saxons, the Danes, and the Normans, sort of flanking him. So this too is, you know, a book of maps for a play about a map. Let me just turn over. Yeah, even after the play has come out in quarto, and the quarto is quite a long text of King Lear, it looks like a sort of early draft of the play. Shakespeare didn't set it aside. When the play is republished in Shakespeare's collected works in the first folio of 1623 after Shakespeare's death, we get a different cut of King Lear, as I'm sure you heard about in the student lecture already. It's a revised, more streamlined version of the play. It moves quicker, it's less digressive. It doesn't have the joint stool scene. It doesn't have the mock trial where the mad Lear and poor Tom and the fool have a fictitious trial of Goneril and Regan. That scene just isn't in here. Shakespeare seems to have changed his mind about who should have the last words of the play. The prominence of the French in Cordelia's army when she's trying to restore King Lear is slightly altered. The differences are interesting. For years, editors republishing the play simply conflated the two so that you got a version of King Lear that's actually longer than either and includes pretty much everything. But that's not how it was in the Jacobean theatre. My experience of talking to directors about this play is that they always think it would be much better to perform this version, the folio version, and the actors playing King Lear initially say, oh, it's a great idea, and then they get into rehearsal and the actor says, hang on, what's happened to the mock trial scene? I want to do the mock trial scene. Put the mock trial scene back in. I mean, what one sees most often in England is a folio cut of King Lear, but with the mock trial scene stuck back in, because actors just like it too much. It has great possibilities. After King Lear, particularly after revising it again in 1610 or so, it will be possible to represent Shakespeare as spending the rest of his career apologizing for having killed Cordelia, deliberately choosing narratives in which a beloved exiled daughter is instead allowed to survive. Plays like Pericles, Cymbeline, The Winter's Tale, and The Tempest. And in time, later after Shakespeare's death, even King Lear itself would be modified to fit this pattern. In 1681, Nahum Tate changed Shakespeare's script to spare Lear and Gloucester and allow Cordelia to become queen and enjoy a happy ending. She marries Edgar. And this depicts Cordelia and her new best friend, her confidant, in the storm scene, about to be rescued by Edgar from an attempted rape by Edmund. She stays around in England during the storm. It becomes a much better part with a happy ending. This enduringly popular adaptation held the stage until the 1830s, displacing Shakespeare's ending for generations of theatregoers. And Dr. Johnson famously said that he read Shakespeare's version once and was so distressed by it that he couldn't possibly regret that you got a happy ending instead when you went to the theatre. So why had Shakespeare chosen so signally to violate his audience's hopes and expectations, producing a denouement regarded as intolerable for the best part of 200 years? One part of the answer may be that in this play, he was determined to look further into the abyss than in any of his previous tragedies, imagining a future in which futurity itself has been cancelled. In King Lear, not only does one particular father alienate and lose his daughters and then die, but the family itself comprehensively fails, and with it, any sense of possible continuity. Just as his Lear curses Goneril with sterility, so Shakespeare's version of the Lear story extinguishes all hope of succession, having the old king die on stage surrounded by the corpses of all his childless daughters. To the onlookers in the play, it looks as much like the end of the world as it does the ending of a play. Is this the promised end, says Kent, or image of that horror, comments Edgar. Neither the 1608 text, which gives its last line to Regan's husband Albany, nor the 1610, which gives them to Edgar, makes it obvious who will rule the realm after the extinction of Lear's line. Kent, who declines the task, implies that he himself intends suicide. Instead, "I have a journey, sir, shortly to go. My master calls me. I must not say no." And the play's closing words, whoever speaks them, make it clear that only further violence can be anticipated unless longevity. "We that are young shall never see so much nor live so long." Okay, onwards to more homelessness and the emblematic. Another part of the answer to why Shakespeare thwarts our expectations of a happy ending for Lear and Cordelia, though, must lie in the other great innovation which Shakespeare made to the Lear story, Lear's madness. In every other version of the King Lear story, Lear does not go mad. This makes any comfortable resolution, even a temporary one, still harder to imagine. Critics, directors, and actors alike continue to argue as to whether Lear dies mad but happy, believing the dead Cordelia to be still alive, or in the same despairing knowledge that she is dead. But neither option looks much like satisfying closure. Lear's madness, furthermore, is closely linked to an existential placelessness, itself part of a vision which has seen through the politics of hereditary monarchy no less than through the politics of the family. In no previous version of the Lear story is the king confronted so emphatically by the spectacle of homelessness, here provided by Edgar in his disguise as poor Tom, the mad vagrant, during the storm scene. Shakespeare's entire play, indeed, enacts a sort of ubiquitous homelessness, and it makes its audiences participants in it. After Lear has divided his kingdom in the first scene, it's no longer obvious where the centre of power is located. Indeed, we don't even know where the first scene takes place. Unlike the other play about ancient Britain, which Shakespeare wrote, Cymbeline, King Lear doesn't even mention London. From the opening onwards, we characteristically meet people in transit across tracts of open countryside. The downwardly mobile king and the upwardly mobile Edmund alike find themselves wandering between the respective headquarters of Gloucester, Goneril, and Regan. But the play never specifies where these are. The only things that are clear are that we're never anywhere urban and that the weather is everywhere ghastly. Once rumours get about that Cordelia and her husband's French army are planning an invasion with the intention of restoring Lear to power, it's true, the old king's allies begin to gravitate towards Dover, but nobody ever actually gets there. The play's one detailed, virtuoso description of a definite location, the account Edgar gives to his blinded father of the vertiginous view from the top of Dover Cliff, turns out to be a bizarre, supposedly therapeutic lie, designed to convince the unfortunate Earl that he has survived a suicide attempt and should be more stoical in future. Lost in a series of unspecified non-places, lost in a story which, even if we have read Holinshead or the older King Lear play, we no longer recognise, thanks to Shakespeare's brutally hope-denying adjustments to his main plot and his addition of the story of Gloucester and his two sons, we too share in the disorientation of Lear when he meets the supposed poor Tom. For Shakespeare, half the point of King Lear, and this is underlined by the quarto title page, I think, is the salutary, edifying experience undergone by a king who not only encounters a mad, homeless vagrant, but has become one himself. This is one of those great emblematic moments which Shakespeare wants to put into the play, where the narrative seems like a pretext for getting you to this image rather than just a piece of storytelling. And dramaturgically, King Lear is both literally and politically a levelling play. Its staging never calls for the use of an upper level. And its pre-Christian universe, though hospitable to delusions and fictions about demons, appears to contain no gods, no heavens, and no hell, just a flat, exposed plain on which human beings struggle and die. Just as the families of Lear and Gloucester tear themselves fatally apart in this play, their conventional domestic loyalties revealed to be contingent on appetite and relative position, so royal and aristocratic power too is exposed as a fiction, part of an unequal social order maintained by violence and fraud. Whatever else this play delivered when it was seen at James's court on December the 26th, 1606, it hardly offered the comforting, on-message spectacle of British unity restored, which the real-life king and the audience presumably anticipated. It's hard not to speculate as to whether Shakespeare's company deliberately arranged for their performance to take place on that date, then still called St. Stephen's Day, a festival still associated in Shakespeare's time with charitable giving to the poor. So, this is a kind of charity performance. You expect it to be a piece of royal propaganda, and actually it's a desperate plea for the redistribution of wealth to the poor. Poor naked wretches, wheresoe'er you are that bide the pelting of this pitiless storm, how shall your houseless heads and unfed sides, your looped and windowed raggedness defend you from seasons such as this? Oh, I've ta'en too little care of this. Take physic, pomp, expose thyself to feel what wretches feel, that thou mayst shake the superflux to them and show the heavens more just. It's not what your average king expects to hear as a Christmas present. Lear is an absolute monarch converted by suffering into a radical egalitarian. And look at that phrase, wheresoe'er you are. This is a play which aspires to speak with savage urgency to everyone, anywhere. And it's only appropriate that one of its earliest recorded productions, not so long after its monetary premiere at court, should have taken place out on the subversive fringes of James's realm. And I'm talking about Yorkshire, near where it says part of the North Sea up to the right, round here. This was among the remote hamlets of North and West Yorkshire, an area formerly rich in Cistercian monasteries, where the Protestant Reformation had been accepted at best grudgingly. In 1609 to 10, an illegal recusant troupe, calling themselves Sir Richard Cholmondeley's Players, having obtained copies of the 1608 printed editions of King Lear and Pericles from a bookseller in York, toured this moorland region, giving performances of both plays, along with a banned Catholic play about the miracles of St. Christopher. We know about this obscure company because they were reported to the authorities by a local Puritan called Sir Posthumus Hoby, after performing at the manor of the Catholic Sir John and Lady Julian York at Gowthwaite in Nidderdale on Candlemas 1610. Despite its presence in this Catholic repertoire, King Lear is not a play which appears to endorse Catholicism. Indeed, one of the texts from which Shakespeare obtained details by which to work up the scenes of Edgar's feigned insanity, specifically the names of the devils by which Edgar as Tom claims to be possessed, was a zealous 1603 pamphlet decrying faked exorcisms performed by members of the Catholic underground, a horrible pamphlet called A Declaration of Egregious Popish Impostures by Archdeacon Samuel Harsnet. And that's Linus Roach playing Edgar as poor Tom in Nick Hytner's production, with my old late friend John Wood playing Lear. He used to live just over there. He was at my wedding. But then Shakespeare's play doesn't seem very optimistic about any other sort of Christian future either. In the unconsecrated, pre-Christian ancient world of King Lear, moments which look like allusions to Christian symbolism, such as the disguised Edgar's resemblance to a humiliated Christ, or the gender-inverted Pieta supplied by Lear's final cradling of the dead Cordelia, seem designed specifically to point to the absence of the accompanying spiritual comfort one might otherwise expect. And, you know, these big emblematic moments, which are always photographed whenever this play is staged. You know, Lear cradling the blinded Gloucester, which, you know, it looks like it ought to be about healing him, but of course it isn't. He's not going to get his sight back. And the inverted Pieta. There's Ian McKellen with Romola Garai as Cordelia, looking like Mary carrying the dead Christ, except of course he's not. And as far as these people are concerned, there is no Christ. The only prophecy King Lear offers comes in the form of the fool's satirical vision of corruptions, which are everywhere ubiquitous anyway. And at its conclusion, this tragicomic clown gestures not towards a future redeemed by divine grace, but with self-cancelling meta-theatrical mockery towards a legendary enchanter. And I quote at the end of the fool's mock prophecy, "This prophecy Merlin shall make, for I live before his time." It's a very good joke. Even so, the adherents to the forbidden old faith who made up Cholmondeley's players were surely right in recognising at least that King Lear was not on the side of any present-day political establishment, let alone any present-day royal family. In this play, Shakespeare retained a bleakness about human relations within the family and about the intransigent reality of political injustice and existential uncertainty, which would not be matched again before Samuel Beckett's Endgame. This play is indeed broken, but it's only by being so that it can show us so compellingly the continuing brokenness of the world in which we continue to live. Right, I'm just now, here's the epilogue. I'm just going to talk quickly about some examples. This is David Warner, who performed the play in a very intelligent composite of the folio and quarto texts back in 2005. I put together a book of essays by actors about playing tragedy and what it meant to simulate death. I got in touch with David, who was about to open as Lear in Chichester. And he said, "Oh yeah, come and see it, and you know, I'll think about it, see how it goes." Nikki and I went to see the show, and he agreed to meet us and talk about the book over tea before the performance. And I'm very, very familiar with David Warner's work from film. I'm too young to have seen his Hamlet. He was a great, great Hamlet in 1965, directed by Peter Hall at the RSC, and he played Henry VI in the great RSC sequence of history plays in the 60s, the Wars of the Roses. But after that, he played no Shakespeare. He went to Hollywood. He made films. He became an alcoholic, made more films. He plays the villain in Titanic. He plays the villain in some really terrible movies. But he came back to England, and having played Hamlet in 1965 and done no live theatre and no Shakespeare, 40 years later, he then did King Lear. When Nikki and I met him for tea, I at first didn't recognize him because he'd grown that white beard. It was November, as I recall. And I said, "Oh, yeah, we came sat down." I said, "Oh, we didn't recognize you, what with that, having grown that beard." And he said, "Well, yes." A very lugubrious man he was. He said, "Well, now I suppose at least if this production doesn't go well, at least I'll be able to get work at some department store as Father Christmas." Needless to say, the production went extremely well, and he never played Father Christmas, which, you know, I'd been amused to see. That's a picture of him with the beard shaved off at the book launch party with Sam West, who wrote about Hamlet in the book. They're comparing notes about playing Hamlet. Yeah, he was a marvelous and fascinating Lear. At that party was the day he had been cast as Falstaff. That's as cheerful as David Warner ever looked. He's dead now. He wore a lot of padding to play Falstaff. He was rather gaunt. Here, some of you will immediately recognize this splendid Goneril on the right in 2008. This is Kelly Hunter. and playing King Lear, Greg Hicks, who also worked with Kelly Hunter's theatre company for the dispossessed and for the those on the autistic spectrum, flute theatre. Greg played Caliban for her in the first ever flute show for autistic audiences, and he played Claudius when Kelly played Gertrude in her adaptation of Hamlet. This was a production, again, Royal Shakespeare Company, 2008. I think the most notable thing, I mean, Kelly was wonderful. I mean, she made the mew in Marry Your Manhood mew last for about 30 seconds. I've never known such a taunting meow from a Goneril. The fool was played by an actress called Catherine Hunter, who had herself played King Lear rather well in the 1990s, but she drove Greg Hicks absolutely mad because in the storm scene, she would recite his big speeches along with him because she knew them. You know, he nearly killed her, I think, by the end of that show. It went to New York. Here's a female Lear, Glenda Jackson, in 2016. Glenda, who my father and I saw play Cleopatra, you know, years earlier. But in 2016, she played Lear. It wasn't particularly noticeable that it was a female Lear. She was just old and angry. And much the role was given much power by the kind of association of Glenda's long history as a performer in this country and as a politician, because she gave up acting to become a member of parliament. So, you know, she actually sounded like she knew what she was talking about when she talked about crowds of courtiers and power and flattery and all these things. It was an amazing piece of work. Very stripped back, practically no scenery, really earnest production, and impressively so. Yeah, this is the production that I couldn't persuade my father to come and see. This was 1982 in Stratford. This is a picture of the actor who played the fool, painted by the actor who played the fool, because he was a painter as well as an actor, and he was also a novelist. He was a complete overachiever. This was Anthony Sher, who the only actor who I've seen play the fool and also play King Lear. In 82, he played the fool with Michael Gambon as King Lear. Nobody remembers that it was Michael Gambon who played King Lear. Even Gambon himself said, look, during rehearsal, look, the play's supposed to be called King Lear, not some bloke with a red nose and also King Lear. You know, Sher was very energetic, came up with an amazing performance sort of based on Grock, this kind of Beckettian 20th century music hall vaudeville sort of clown. He was wonderful. But, you know, Gambon, you barely noticed him. He was sort of totally upstaged. When it was Tony's turn, this was again 2016. This was the last major role he played in Shakespeare. He died of cancer not all that long afterwards. Again, this played on the audience's memories of him, because in the 1990s, in the early 1990s, Tony played Tamburlaine the Great, Marlowe's great, appalling tyrant, world conqueror. And in Tamburlaine has himself brought onto the stage in a chariot pulled by kings. Tony's Lear had an incredible first entrance where, as you can see in the top left, he was carried on in this kind of reliquary, this kind of holy theocratic monarch carried on the shoulders of servants, like the chariot that brought Tamburlaine onto the stage, with the most incredible fanfare. This was directed by, this is the one in which my student was playing a non-speaking knight. It was directed by Tony's husband, Greg Doran. Greg also then had the job of arranging Tony's funeral, not all that long afterwards, and with appalling theatrical power. I mean, God, actors do good funerals. The coffin was carried into Holy Trinity Church in Stratford to the music of the same fanfare that to which Tony had entered as King Lear. This was like the King Lear's funeral. It was amazing. Here, since it's Easter, you get the Easter bunny as a bonus with this. This is another female Lear, a recent one. This was I saw this show in Craiova last time the Craiova Festival was on, 2024. This is Tang Shu-wing, a director from Hong Kong, who directed a King Lear that was full length but completely wordless. It was more like a sort of modern dance performance with an incredible soundscape. This is Cecilia Yip Tung, who's a tremendous star in China and very graceful, very powerful, compelling presence, but really worrying. Here's a director from Hong Kong who is staging King Lear, a play full of political protest, and the actors don't speak. It was as if they had sellotape over their faces and were pointing at it. There's something very, he's been in Hong Kong for a long time, since before the People's Republic took it back. And there's a kind of implicit political comment going on when you do Lear and you cut the words. This is the last thing I'm going to show you. This is the last slide. And this is, I think, is this the last Lear I've seen? Have I seen a Lear this year? No, I think it is. I worked on this, I'm very proud to say. This is an adaptation of King Lear, staged in my hometown on the south coast of England by a company called Vita Nova, who are a theatre company of recovering addicts. They get drama therapy as part of their treatment, if you like. They're given the opportunity to perform. These are people who have been poor Tom, people who've been absolutely to the bottom, inarticulate, incapable, dependent. And Sharon Coyne, an old friend of mine who's the head of the company, produced an adaptation of King Lear about a deluded alcoholic matriarch who is put into a hospital against her will by her daughters and has delusions of being an absolute monarch. And this fellow patient who's the fool. It was really, really interesting and responded very, very intelligently to those aspects of the play. Were really marvelous poor Tom scenes, even though these are people who haven't had actor training, but have had the experience of destitution. There's a lot of directions you can go with this play. I ought to mention probably Ken Branagh's production, which was the most cut major professional Lear I've ever seen. That was only a couple of years ago. Cut to 2 hours with no interval, with a cast of quite young actors, amongst whom Branagh would look older, even though he looks ridiculously well preserved, considering that he's my age exactly. It was the opposite of a Woolfit Lear. Branagh was rather good looking. He didn't look particularly ruined. And it was much more interested in following the argument of the play than in going for big moments of pathos. This disappointed a lot of theatre critics, but I was quite sympathetic to it. Anyway, I'm going to stop sharing now, and you can ask me things you actually want to know, instead of just hearing me ramble on about a lot of productions that you haven't seen. There we go, like that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, dear Michael. It was a great experience for all of us. And first of all, I'd like to thank you for this episode from your family history, which created the general atmosphere of our today's lecture just before the Easter time. And this very personal accent emphasized that our attitude to Shakespeare, our relations with his plays can be so intimate, so close, and probably even so important for our memories and our life stories. Thank you very much for the possibility to see those unique pages of the lists of people made in the times of the King James I. and for the history of forming the flag. We have never heard about it. It's really great. And thank you for magnificent and even fantastic chance to touch the performances of King Lear we hadn't possibility to see in person. And at last, but not least, for this accent on the tragedy of homelessness that is so topical for many Ukrainians today. And now I'd like to invite my colleagues, my friends, my students to ask the questions and to take part in our discussion on King Lear. So who would like
bless
to
you.
be the first?
It's great finally to... Yeah, can I just say what a pleasure it is to see the names and faces of some of you. See Natalia Vysotska on my screen and Vika Marinesco and Roman. And for Roman Lavrenti, I should point out that I am wearing an Ivan Franko National University of Lviv sweatshirt for the occasion, since my university has the great privilege of being twinned with that institution. And there's Dasha as well, Dasha Moskvitina, how nice. Anyway, anybody who wants to say anything should say something.
Daria Lazarenko and Natalia, all the members of our Shakespeare team are present here. And dear colleagues, you can ask your questions in Ukrainian, and Leila Buhrova, my student, will translate your question to Michael and Michael's answers to these questions into Ukrainian. So any possibility orally or in chat, you may ask your questions. Будь ласка, шановні друзі, ви можете задавати свої питання українською мовою, і моя студентка Лейла Бугрова перекладе, якщо необхідно, ваші запитання і відповіді Майкла українською. So, Олена Тихомирова, our colleague from Kyiv, is the first to answer her question. Olena, please, you're welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Michael. It was amazing to listen to you speak about all these productions. So I wonder, you've said that you've seen so many King Lears. So when you are going to see yet another Lear, what is your main interest in it? Do you want to see a new take, or are you waiting for particular speeches, or is it you want to see this new Lear, how this actor would perform the role?
Yeah, and all of the above. And I want to think about the play again and think about the things the play talks about. But above all, I want to see what this audience is making of it, what it's like for people who haven't seen the play before, what it is about this production which doesn't manage to speak to the people I'm seeing it with. You know, why this play now? What is it about this play which might speak in this context? It's true that if I'm not in floods of tears at the end, I might ask for my money back. But there are productions that don't want to do that. But if I'm not sobbing during the reconciliation scene with Cordelia, you know, here's another very personal anecdote. I went to see Nigel Davenport play King Lear in a touring production with a young woman with whom, you know, I'd been going out for about 5 years. And during the reconciliation scene with Cordelia, you know, it wasn't a very good company. You know, Davenport was fine, but it wasn't a great production. But of course, it's a fantastic piece of writing. During the reconciliation scene with Cordelia, I was in floods of tears. You know, tears were just running down my face. And my soon-to-be ex-girlfriend turned to me and whispered, "What are you crying for? They're not very good." You know, that relationship was clearly doomed. You know, it couldn't go on after that, really.
Thank you so much for the answer. It's a great point about the audience, right? I did not expect you.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah. Yes, you're looking at other people, at their reactions, and so on.
Well, yes. Well, one goes to the theatre to experience the play as part of a larger collective, and you want to feel something clicking. You know, the audience at that David Warner Lear, which was in a small space, were absolutely gripped. it was just compelling, the level of attention and engagement and collective sort of trauma that we all went through for Warner's Lear was astonishing. That was a great thing. I can't persuade Nikki to see Lear anymore. She finds it too upsetting. And next week, in a couple of weeks, a friend of ours is playing Titus Andronicus, and she won't come to that either. Whereas, I continue to go to Titus. I continue to find it fascinating and necessary somehow.
Thank you very much. Who would like to be the next one?
Дозвольте. Можна?
Так, звичайно, Сергію. Лейла, перекладете пана Сергія. Окей, Сергію, будь ласка.
Майкле, дякую за прекрасну лекцію. Попри те, що не всі нюанси англійської мови мені вдалося вловити, my English is very poor, отримав величезну насолоду від самого способу подачі. Просто неймовірне володіння голосом. Це цілковитий захват.
Стоп, перекладаємо, Лейла.
Yes, so Michael, thank you for a wonderful lecture. Despite the fact that he was not able to capture maybe all the nuances of the English language, he still says that he got an immense pleasure from the very method of your presentation. He praises your incredible voice mastery, as I think all of us do, and he says it's an absolute delight. And his question follows.
Моє запитання в наступному. Як ви дивитеся вистави незнайомою вам мовою, і яку колекцію постановок Шекспіра театрами України змогли зібрати на сьогоднішній день?
There are two questions in this question. First of all, how do you watch foreign plays in foreign languages that you are not familiar with? That's question number one. And question number two is, which Ukrainian plays have you already got in your collection, on your watched list?
Ukrainian performances. I'm sorry, performances of Shakespeare plays in Ukraine.
Yes,
Я
sorry.
уточнюю, що маю на увазі. Ваша фраза про готовність долати відстань заради повторного перегляду вистави «Гамлет» Ростислава Держипільського стала крилатою в українському театральному просторі.
Одну секундочку, Сергію, зачекайте. Лейла, йдеться про те, що під час фестивалю у Франківську Майкл сказав цю фразу, що він готовий заради, як там, Сергію, заради того, щоб подивитися
Гамлета другий раз, готовий долати на колінах, якщо я правильно пам'ятаю, цю відстань до вистави.
Тобто готовий приїхати ще в Україну, щоб подивитись. Ця фраза стала крилатою для українців, регулярно повторюється в наших колах. І запитання, Сергію?
І «Короля Ліра» Ужгородського Майкл бачив в Британії. Тобто, наскільки помітний український Шекспір сьогодні в світі, в Європі, з вашої точки зору?
Okay, yeah, I'll try. I'll do my best, I swear. So, first of all, so he mentions that a phrase that you've said in Frankivsk, right, during after one of the stage plays, that you were ready to cross distances to see the Ужгород play once again. That's something he mentions, and the question he asks is basically how noticeable is Ukrainian Shakespeare nowadays in the world, in Europe?
Well, of course, Ukraine is on everyone's minds, and that, it's a rather drastic way of achieving publicity for stage productions, but it certainly works. And in the world of theatre production, we've had a Ukrainian King Lear staged in Stratford. By that company of displaced persons from the border with Slovenia. I've seen the Melody Company perform their Dream in Verona in Italy, as well as in Ivano-Frankivsk. I've seen Rostislav Dezhipilsky's Romeo and Juliet in Craiova, as well as in Ivano-Frankivsk. It is very much on people's maps, and so it should be. I mean, I teach a course on performances of Shakespeare around the world, and it culminates in a week on Ukraine. You know, my students watch a video recording of Rostislav's Hamlet and of Holt, that play by Trunova, is it? It's
Tamara
but anyways, it's kind
Tamara Trunova, the director. Tamara
that's the
Trunova.
one. Yes, Tamara Trunova, and that's her. It's a good show. And also, they watch a recording of Oksana Dmitrieva's Tempest. It's if a company are using a fairly straightforward translation, then that's one of the advantages of there being a canon of classics of world drama. You know, the audience don't need a translation if they know roughly what happens in each scene anyway. I've you know, I'm trying to think what would be the list of shows I've seen. I saw Bohumarsov's Twelfth Night when I was in Kyiv in 2018. And I saw a Romeo and Juliet in Lviv by a young company in one of the youth theatres. I saw a play called Twelfth Night by the actors who know nothing about Shakespeare in a cabaret theatre in Lviv. And I saw, did I see anything else on that trip? Yeah, and I saw a company called Voskresenia do a show that involved a lot of stilts and fireworks called To Meet with Prospero at the Craiova Festival in 2014. I think that was the first Ukrainian Shakespeare I saw. Again, one looks, you know, there are certain patterns that revivals of particular Shakespeare plays are likely to have in common across languages and across theatre cultures. There are some things that ask to be cut, or that you can cut first, or that you might choose to emphasize in this particular play. One picks those things up, but mainly with Ukrainian Shakespeare, one looks at the extraordinary eclectic energy and seriousness of modern Ukrainian directors. Of course, I saw Bohumarsov's Coriolanus as well at Ivano-Frankivsk this last June. And its excitement about making contact with its own audience, its urgency about actually speaking directly to its audience. You know, I deliberately haven't mentioned the Russian productions of King Lear I've seen over the years, but I don't think I would have done anyway, because they're really rather boring, you know, rather monumental and a bit self-congratulatory, and you know, they have a few visual ideas and don't really speak, you know, take pleasure in not speaking to the audience. They want it to be the same every night and sort of very, very solemn. You know, there's something wonderfully unsolemn, and at the same, you know, it's too urgent to be solemn as far as Ukrainian Shakespeare is concerned, in my experience of it. Which you know, and you know, I really hope to see Ole Stefan as Lear. That would be a great treat.
Thank you very much, Mike.
I don't know if that answers anything at all, but
Thank you.
There we are.
Probably it will be rather difficult for Leila to translate, maybe some main messages, okay, Leila? And then we'll have an opportunity to listen to this lecture, because it is recorded and everyone could be able to listen to this answer and to understand it completely without translation. But now, Leila, would you be so kind as to translate for our
Так, я виділю декілька основних акцентів з приводу поширеності, актуальності українського Шекспіра в Європі. Звісно, ми дуже актуальні. Зараз взагалі, наскільки я розумію, так, український театр є актуальною темою в Європі, і було згадано постановки в, наскільки я пам'ятаю, Стретфорд-на-Ейвоні.
Приїжджав у Стретфорд-на-Ейвоні театр з Ужгороду з постановкою, аматорською постановкою Короля Ліра, в якій брали участь переселені особи, переселенці, внутрішньо переміщені особи з півдня України, з Херсона, Запорізької області, тієї частини, яка окупована. Продовжуйте, будь ласка, Лейла. Вони ставили свого Ліра в Стретфорді, і Майкл про це згадав.
Також було згадано про постановку у Вероні, Наскільки я пам'ятаю, і з приводу, скажімо так, списку проглянутого, так, було, наскільки я пам'ятаю, Ромео та Джульєта українського театру. Не можу згадати точно місто, мені здається, Львівський, так, Львівський театр.
Івано-Франківський театр Держипільського постановка Ромео Джульєта. Майкл згадав так само про львівські постановки і назвав Оксану Дмитрієву з її «Бурею», яку вже переглянув.
І Тамару Трунову з її Хельтом, Холтом, він назвав Холт.
Так, зокрема, ще... Так. Зокрема, що було згадано з приводу, прозвучала фраза про те, що українські постановки відрізняються своєю еклектичною енергією та серйозністю. І також було наголошено на тому, що у нас в українському театрі є певне захоплення ідеєю інтеракції з аудиторією, з глядачем, якої на контрасті, наприклад, у російських постановках Майкл не помітив. Тобто у них немає такого бажання грати з аудиторією, щось змінювати в тому, як вони постановлюють. І з приводу того, як він, власне, переглядає постановки, мовами якими не володіє, він сказав, що тут є бонус дуже відомих постановок в тому, що їх фактично майже всі знають на пам'ять, тому текст не обов'язково.
Всі знають, і тому...
Так, і тому їх можна зрозуміти без знання мови.
Дуже дякую, Лейла, дуже дякую, супер. Я думаю, що наша аудиторія зрозуміла відповідь. Наталя Висоцька.
Okay, just to begin with, I wanted to Michael to know how much I enjoy seeing him and listening to him, and how wonderful it was both intellectually and emotionally to hear your talk. And my question is about the way you have a report with the shows you see. Do you take notes immediately after the show, or do you have such a phenomenal memory as to remember them in every detail after years and so on? What do you do about it?
Yeah. Well, yes, in the interval when the lights come up and at the end, certainly if I'm expecting to write about a show, I will scribble things in the program. A tiny percentage of which I will subsequently be able to read because it's not good conditions for writing, and my handwriting is getting worse and worse. But yeah, if I'm going to write about a show, then I'll take notes as quickly as possible after I've seen it. Otherwise, I will assume that I will remember the good bits, or I will remember the important things. You know, I will remember moments from that production which were the moments where I either thought, oh, this is terrible, or, you know, or where it actually connected with me, or where something, you could feel something happening in the auditorium. But I spent 10 years having to write about every single professional Shakespeare production in England. And that was something of a training. So I've got piles of programs with lots of illegible scribbles all over them. From that period, and yeah, it became a kind of standard method for doing it. And of course, one, you know, nowadays, because I live in Stratford and I'm around a theatre company, and you know, indeed, my daughter is an actor, and I know a lot of theatre people. You know, one talks to them, one picks things up around the edges as well. Sometimes one watches rehearsals and so one can see what was being emphasized and what possibilities were being encouraged and which ones were being deliberately sidestepped sometimes. But yeah, I think you have to take notes quick. Well, you know, straight after the performance, before you sleep.
Right.
Yeah, it's lovely to see you, Natalia, and you know, I owe you hospitality. You know, I have the happiest memories of staying in your apartment in Kyiv, and you're welcome here anytime.
And you're welcome back to Kyiv anytime.
I look forward to it very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. And I do believe that after our victory, this dream of all of us to listen to your brilliant lectures in Kyiv, in Zaporizhia, in Kharkiv become true. And the next person who would like to ask a question is Lina Kozyriacka.
Yeah, hello.
Lina?
Yeah, thanks. So hello, Michael. I wanted to say thank you for this awesome lecture. So that was great. And my question is, what are your feelings, emotions every time you attend a new performance? I mean, of course, like in a new place and with new actors. And do you have these emotions of for the first time, or your emotions are different?
Well, one's relation to King Lear in particular changes very much as one's life develops. You know, when I first used to see King Lear, I was at best Edgar. You know, nowadays, you know, I have grown-up daughters. You know, I am King Lear. You know, one different bits of the play, different experiences articulated in the play resonate differently. I mean, that's the nice thing about really good pieces of writing. They change with you. You know, you're even just reading the script is going to be a different experience because one is a different person to when one read it first. Different bits of it will jump out for the page at you, and different things will resonate in the theatre. So I anticipate that even just the luxury of being in a darkened room for 3 hours with my university not sending me emails, when it will enable something spiritual to happen. Whether the production is any good or not, one can always look forward to that. It's a great thing. There are different things that twist the knife differently with King Lear as when one's seen it a few times.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Michael. And Daria Moskvitina, Ukrainian Shakespeare Center.
Hello, Dia. Have been missing you so much. My question will be, as we all know, kind of it's actually Hamlet that is being mostly experimented upon. I mean, misgender cast, any other types of cast, but it's not King Lear. Again, but have you ever seen anything like, what was the craziest in terms of experiment performance of King Lear in your lifetime so far?
Well, there was a show I remember a show at the Edinburgh Festival, the first time I went to the Edinburgh Festival in 1980, called Leering at Ubu, which was just a hybrid of King Lear and Père Ubu, which is really quite an easy thing to do. And once one had read the title, one barely needed to see the show. It was, you know, a very student kind of Lear, come Père Ubu. You know, I have seen, you know, as I've said, I've seen 3 major female King Lears now. Kurosawa, of course, changes the gender of the sons of the daughters into sons in his movie version Ran, which but it's not a very experimental film. It's a rather old-fashioned costume drama of a movie, really, with big battle scenes and lots of horses and lovely banners. Have I seen a really crazy Lear? No, you're right. I mean, Hamlet asks for craziness much more obviously than Lear does. And of course, he asks for younger performers who are more likely to be willing to do something crazy and directorial with it. I mean, the Hamlet that has just finished in Stratford is set on a sinking liner. You know, it makes no sense whatever except as a kind of dream. But with a very realistic set, and you know, everybody's fallen off the deck and drowned except Hamlet and Laertes by the end of the sword fight. It's kind of ludicrous as a way of telling the story, but you know, it's a striking and memorable image of, you know, people killing themselves instead of taking to the lifeboats. There's a kind of allegory maybe going on there, but with Lear less so. Some of them cling on, some of them fall off. Poor Ophelia, she nearly drowns, and then she has to, she drowns, and then she's dragged back on board, and then for her funeral, she's then thrown into the sea again. It looks a bit futile, really, from her point of view. But no, Catherine Hunter was an interesting Lear the first time she played it, and she played it in starting in a hospital bed, as though much of the play was a kind of dream sequence about her family, and it went back to being real, sort of gradually more realistically at the hospital bed for the last scene. Yeah, it's such an experimental play anyway, King Lear. There are so many scenes in which there's just two actors doing something bizarre, challenging you to think this is peculiar, this is very extreme, that in a way it's such an experiment to try and stage it at all that you don't need to make it, more avant-garde. It's a Beckett play already for long sections.
Thank you.
Thank you so
dear
much.
Michael. And we have two questions more because we have 1:30 now, and it's a family day, and I can't bother Professor Michael Dobson longer, so I see 3 questions. Okay, Поліна Черечанська.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for your great lecture. I really liked it. And my question is, many view King Lear as a tragedy of old age and madness, but do you think the play also offers a political warning about leadership, legacy, or even democracy gone wrong? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. You can play it just as a kind of case study in how senility should be dealt with. You can make him into a very realistic kind of embarrassing aging parent the children want to put into a home, and treat it as a kind of domestic or psychological little family drama. But the play begs us and tells us to think about politics, to think about corruption, to think about bribery, to think about the mad scenes in Lear when Lear starts telling the truth about the world. That's the way madness tends to work in Shakespeare. Despite the misogyny that his rants are tinged with, he kind of sees through everything. You can't really put a royal regime back together after that. It's not a play that has simple political answers, but it will work very much as a political play as well as a domestic drama. Tragedy for Shakespeare tends to mean stories in which parents cause the deaths of children, and the children often die before the parents do. Whereas in comedy, the children triumph and the parents are going to go off and die if they're even noticed much at the end. That's what comedy and tragedy mean. It's a question of how time and succession are playing out. Doesn't look good for the young at the end of King Lear, the surviving young, at all.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Олександр Жарик.
Hey, glad to see you, and was glad to hear your lecture. So, I have a question about the significance of this play. Will it always be topical, or do you think that King Lear will once lose its significance simply due to us becoming maybe better as a humanity?
Wouldn't that be lovely? Wouldn't it be great to imagine a world in which people stage Shakespeare's tragedies and audiences came and thought, gosh, wasn't it terrible back then when people still used to die and experience pain and behave badly to one another before we all learned to be immortal and incredibly nice to each other at all times. I'm afraid I don't see Lear going out of fashion it becomes topical. These plays find things to resonate with. They always seem to be about the place and the time where they're being staged. That's part of their trick. You know, they're not closed, unchanging monuments. They resonate with who's watching them and who's telling the story and where they're being staged. The moment at which they're being staged. Some bits will maybe just pass as narrative filler, and other bits will just leap out and say, "Oh yeah, this is the world we live in." I'm afraid King Lear looks much more like the world we're living in now than it did when I was first watching King Lear, when I did think it was a play about an old man who gets it wrong with his children. Yeah, now it looks much more like a description of where we've got to collectively.
Mhm. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks very much.
Юлія Щукіна.
Так, я проситиму, щоб мені допомогли з перекладом, будь ласка.
Лейла, перекладіть, будь ласка.
Я
Юлія
хочу...
Щукіна is the representative of our theater community and from Kharkiv. That is very important because Kharkiv is constantly under the complete attacks, and, as well as Zaporizhia and Kyiv now. Юля.
Я хочу перш за все подякувати пану Майклу за той майстер-клас, який він дав нам в рамках воркшопу минулого року, коли ми всі вчилися писати рецензії за взірцями наших менторів з Європи, з Америки, з світу.
Yulia thanks you greatly, first of all, for the course of workshops that she has participated in last year, was it?
Yeah, it was in a workshop on theater criticism that took place in January and February 2024, where you delivered us some lectures and you were a tutor. Go on, please.
Так, і я хотіла також подякувати за 2 лекції, які я мала змогу почути. Одну у Івано-Франківську минулого червня і сьогоднішню лекцію. Дуже вдячна за те, як ви розширюєте кордони нашої свідомості вашими знаннями і вашим володінням саме британським контекстом цієї шекспірівської теми.
Yulia also thanks you very much for the 2 lectures she has attended, one in Ivano-Frankivsk and today's lecture as well, and she says that it's wonderful that you are broadening our horizons by showing us the British perspective on this issue.
І, власне, у мене є запитання, оскільки саме завдяки допомозі наших менторів, світових шекспірологів, ми мали змогу впродовж цього року бачити, як розвивалася в нас оця критика на вистави за шекспірівськими п'єсами, то я маю запитання, як ви оцінюєте, чи достатньо пишуть про шекспірівські вистави в світовому контексті, чи ви задоволені тим, як висвітлюються ці вистави, зокрема в Британії? Тобто, наскільки корелюються критика і практика сценічна?
Okay, Yulia also wants to ask, nowadays, thanks to the world experience, the criticism is developing greatly, but she wants to know whether or not you think there is enough discussion, enough criticism. Does the amount of criticism correlate with the amount of plays being staged nowadays?
That's a very interesting question. There's considerable disquiet in this country about the lack of space that theatre gets in newspapers compared to what it used to get. I mean, newspapers are sort of withering away anyway in the face of online news. But when I was first reviewing theatre, when you went to a press night in Stratford, as you came out of the theatre, you would see all the leading theatre reviewers of England in a queue for a public telephone, and they would dictate their reviews down the line. They would race each other as to who got in there first, whether it was Michael Billington or Charles Spencer or whoever it was. And because the national newspapers wanted to carry a review of the opening night the very next day. So straight after the show, you wrote part of your review during the interval and you dictate it down the phone. I used to do be on a radio show for the BBC sometimes when I worked in London, where I would go to the first night of a new production and they would rush me in a taxi from the theatre straight into the studio and stick me in front of a microphone and say, what was it like? You know, and often I would be trembling from the way this taxi had zoomed around London at appalling speed to get me to the BBC studio. Those days have gone. Theatre reviews tend to be much, much shorter. There tend not to be designated theatre critics who really know about theatre and who can make a whole job out of just writing about theatre for a national newspaper anymore. So in this country, while there's a lot of academic writing about theatre, probably as much as we need, the general discussion about theatre, you know, it's played down. Theatre is a kind of, well, it's a place where people happen to train before they go onto Netflix or into cinema. Because I can't read Ukrainian, you know, nobody needs to apologize to me about their English. I mean, my Ukrainian is still pretty much non-existent. I don't know what the situation is like in Ukraine, how much public discussion outside the kind of theatre club of specialists and practitioners goes on. I hope a lot. I mean, to me, theatre is very closely related to democracy. You know, these are rooms in which people discuss important things in person, and that is, you know, that's a very, very important art form to me anyway. So I hope the discussion will continue, and that, you know, events like Ivano-Frankivsk will continue to bring the great vigor and urgency of Ukrainian theatre into prominence within public discussions of what's happening in Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you for this sharing unique personal experience. Probably it will prompt our Ukrainian theatre critics and Ukrainian Shakespeareans how to do in this situation and how to share their own experience of seeing this or that performance with or among the audience, among the other people. Thank you very much for it. And I see that one person is still trying to ask your
I'm
question.
terribly sorry.
I'm sorry, Лейла, will you translate? And Евеліна, якщо ви наполягаєте на своєму питанні, ми, звичайно, задамо, але ми вже перебрали режим часу. Тому подумайте, чи таки наполягаєте на запитанні. Лейла, перекладіть, будь ласка, відповідь Майкла.
Так, я перепрошую, головні з головного, що встигла записати. По-перше, Майкл згадав про те, що в театру немає в Британії, трохи недостатньо місця в газетах на даний момент, на його погляд, порівняно із тим, що було раніше. Тому що коли він вперше, скажімо так, вливався в рецензії, сам цим займався, і після відвідування, наприклад, п'єси, як це відбувалося? Одразу всі критики, які на неї сходили, дуже швидко бігли до публічних телефонів для того, щоб швиденько по телефону надиктувати свою рецензію, щоб змагатися в тому, хто ж буде перший, чию рецензію першою публікують. Зараз такого вже немає, такої активності, на його погляд. Він також згадав про те, що коли він брав участь у радіошоу для BBC у Лондоні, якщо не помиляюся, було таке, що от він подивився п'єсу, і його буквально з цієї п'єси забрали як гарячий пиріжок в таксі і привезли в студію для того, щоб він одразу розказав їм про свої враження, представив свою рецензію. Він був аж трохи переляканий такою швидкою поїздкою. Він сказав, що загалом тепер рецензії стають трохи коротшими, і не так багато людей здатні зробити із рецензування професію повноцінну, якою вони можуть собі заробити на хліб. Він також згадав, що в Британії наразі досить багато з цього приводу є академічного письма, і також він згадав, що в театрі зараз в Британії, наскільки я зрозуміла, здебільшого тренуються перед тим, як піти зніматися в кіно або на Нетфліксі. Майкл також сказав, що, на жаль, через його трохи недостатні знання української, він не може повністю судити про ситуацію у нас в Україні з приводу дискусій, з приводу рецензій, але сподівається, що у нас ці дискусії дуже широкі. Також він сказав, що для нього театральні дискусії дуже сильно асоціюються із демократією як такою, тому що це свобода слова, та сподівається на продовження, зокрема, цієї театральної дискусії, як була в Івано-Франківську, наприклад. Сподіваюсь, нічого сильно не змінила.
Правильно, дякую. Ну і був ще такий дуже корисний досвід про те, що Майкла про вистави запитують, навіть коли він їде в таксі, відразу ж після вистави. І це був такий дуже класний досвід. Мої колеги, хто хотів би подякувати, зараз приєднуються. So thank you very much, Michael, for this fantastic lecture. We can't but admire all the information, the manner, the new ideas, and this unique atmosphere you have created for all of us. And I suppose that we will keep this atmosphere in our hearts, in our souls. And there are a lot of positive reactions and thanks and the gratitude expressed by the members of our audience in chat. And we are to finish our communication to end this lecture for today. I will be happy to invite everybody and Michael Dobson, Professor Michael Dobson from Stretford-upon-Avon, to participate in our 7 o'clock p.m. meeting on Monday. It'll be the round table with Dmytro Zakhozhenko and Oleg Stefan, who created King Lear in Ukraine. The first night took place some days, maybe 2 weeks ago. So thank you very much. And we would like to send you our positive reactions, our hearts, and our thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bless
Happy
you.
Easter.
Thank you. Happy
Thank
Easter
you.
to all of you. My elder daughter is downstairs, so we're going to drink some Ukrainian wine, and I promise I won't curse her at all. Thank you so much for letting me take part in Shakespeare Days in Ukraine.
Thank you, dear Michael. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Happy Easter.
Right.
Bye-bye.